Welcome to Platemark Series 2, the history of Western printmaking. My name is Ann Shafer, and I'm your host. I'm here with...
Drew Ludwig.
Right. So the two of us are trying to bring you a history of Western printmaking. And today we are continuing on with our early Italian history in the world of printmaking. Sort of, where are we? 15-something?
Well, let's just say Raphael just died, and it's 1520. And by the way, this is the Italians, but it's not all of the Italians.
Oh, for sure.
We're going to kind of talk about the Florentine / Roman artists, and we've come to realize that we need to tuck Venice into another spot, because just like in Venice, California, it's kind of its own planet, and it differs from the more intellectual centers of Rome and Florence.
Right. They're all duchies, right?
They're all doing their own thing up there. Well, so Venice is a republic, but they're so cosmopolitan, and they have some of their own quirks, like liking colored papers for their etchings, and other things. Like they have Titian, and he's doing his thing.
They have Titian.
And it'll have a profound impact.
Right.
But we'll get to that. Oh, did you want to tell them where we are, our positionality?
Yes, we got to do all that stuff.
Okay.
All right. We are recording this podcast and all of these episodes at the Purple Crayon Press.
Booyah.
Which is in Charles Village, Baltimore, Maryland. It is the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. I identify as a cis-het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her.
I identify as a gay, white, trans man, and I use the pronouns he, him, and I'm a good hard worker.
You sure as hell are.
But I'm a manual worker,
But your brain, you have both.
But if you folks could see how nice and beat up my hands are and how knobby the joints are, and I just keep looking at what we've been talking about as work as well as intellectual play, and I think we get to see that even more with some of the things that we're going to talk about today, perhaps.
Sure. All right. So before we get rolling, we're just going to take a micro break, and we will be back, and we'll start in on, where are we starting? We're going to remind you about the sack of Rome.
Well, yeah.
And then we'll jump from there.
Well, okay.
Okay. All right, we're back. So just a quick reminder about the sack of Rome, which is where we left off at the end of the last episode.
Apparently, that's where we left off.
That is where we left off.
We had been talking about how Rome was really the center of all things, and then we had talked about Marcantonio Raimondi, who had established a new mode of printmaking, in a way creating a form of reproductive printmaking, which was new, and he was using the technique of engraving, which is a very laborious process where the artist is essentially pushing the sheet of copper into the beveled edge of a insanely sharp lozenge diamond-shaped tip of a tool to create very precise renderings or recreations of drawings made by others. And Marcantonio Raimondi, I think I've come to the decision that he was a great technician, and we've never seen anything that comes out of his own brain. Sort of like, sidebar, Israhel ben Meckenem, at this time, a little bit before him in the north, was one of the very first printmakers around the 1490s, 1500 or so, that was really creating a body of work, but he was busy engraving everybody else's images as well. Only 25.
Right?
Yeah. We actually showed him in class.
Oh, yeah.
And only 25% of his output were of his own work. And you can really tell.
Yeah, you can tell.
But he could beautifully reproduce somebody else's image. The thing that was cool about him was that he was one of the very first to do a self-portrait with his wife. It's a nifty little double portrait of just shoulders up of he and his wife side by side, and it was one of the very first.
Huh.
But it's kind of like Raimondi. I think there's a shift. It reminds me of one of the students that we had who said, "No, I don't want to be a printmaker. I want to be a master printer." Mm-hmm. And he's done very well. There are those that want to dream up all the stuff and play all the games. And in fact, like...
Was that Ben Elizada?
Yes, of course it was. Hi, Ben. Well, I didn't want to call names.
Hey, why not?
But he was very frank about that.
He was very frank about it.
And that's why he's been able to...
He's a great printer.
And he's been able to work with all kinds of people that
Exactly.
normal mortals like me will never get to meet. But we're going to see another artist today who is a peintre graveur, the painter printmaker, one of the very first, really, who was able to understand, like Raphael, how to really get his brand out there, and that is Parmigianino. But we have to think about what life was like in Rome at its height, in the High Renaissance. You got your Ninja Turtles doing what Ninja Turtles do on the walls of the Vatican. Raphael's just finished the Stanza della Signatura. Michelangelo kind of knocked off this little ditty on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel with over 300 figures, 70 feet in the air, all his own design, and using the human body in its most beautiful, idealized, wildly pumped up state. I don't know many people that would be able to go to the gym and look quite that wonderful in fresco on a curved ceiling, but they do look marvelous. And so it was the high Renaissance. It really couldn't get any better with that whole focus on balance and order and the sheer beauty of human anatomy and understanding ways to render nature as truthfully as possible, as true as the human eye could perceive it. How true could the artist's hands be at creating that in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions? And that was the High Renaissance. And so, but Raphael dies at the age of 37 in 1520.
Do we know how he died?
Well, it's an interesting thing because Google has informed us that. Well, you tell us, Anne. It's actually a great. Read them that one little passage. It's pretty tasty, actually.
Well, you mean the beginning part?
Yeah, the very first sentence.
So I've Googled something. I don't even know. I'm on artnet.com, and it says Raphael's reputation for having a wild sex life has long fed myths that the Renaissance artist died of syphilis in 1520 at age 37. But 400 years after his death, medical researchers have finally put that tall tale to rest, and they're reporting that it was some pulmonary disease, some heart disease.
Caused by, quite possibly, bloodletting, which is just another one of those fine forms of high science back in the day.
Right.
But, this is really frustrating because I didn't know there were rumors of his wild sex. Why was I not informed of this?
I don't know.
Gardner, what's your damn dealio?
I'll do better next time.
I mean, seriously. So he had died of something significant because it ended his life.
At 37.
At 37, roughly the same age as Mozart and roughly the same age as Caravaggio. And
hadn't he painted like 100 Madonnas or something? It was nuts.
800.
800?
800.
800 by age 37.
Well, he's cranking them out, but he's also doing it in a beautiful new way.
Correct.
And finding the nugget, the ticket that his viewing in church public would want, which is this totally beautiful humanized virgin with her Northern Renaissance Italian blonde hair,
right.
Usually, often, in a kind of a triangular positioning with, her infant, nice and chubby thighs, chubby legs, chubby feet, little starfish hands, in a nice landscape or sitting on a chair.
Very stable triangular thing.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Just solid. And you could cut it with a knife, and it would be almost perfect symmetry in the way that he's balanced his composition and even the weight of the human figures against the beauty and the evaporated air of, watery air of the atmosphere that surrounds them. And it's all in these glorious kind of primary colors, juicy, wonderful oil color. And, I really try to think about these folks in their time and place. And so, Leonardo, he dies in 1519. He's an old guy. He's been around since 1452. Michelangelo doesn't die. He just keeps on chugging.
He's still alive somewhere.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he born in 1475, and he doesn't die till 1564. So he's really only halfway through his 88, 89-year life, which is astonishing. He lived 2 lifetimes.
Yeah.
Because really, my sources tell me that, the average lifespan is about 40 in the Renaissance. And, that these artists are now cult heroes is one thing, but then you start thinking about Leonardo's just passed, Raphael dies in 1520, Michelangelo's continuing, but he never stops morphing, but Rome certainly did. All 3 of these artists are really being treated well by the patrons who want the very best stuff of their time, but the sack of Rome just really put a stop to so much of that. And I had read a passage last time about how these German mercenary troops that were going to be paid by Charles V of Spain invade Rome and literally devastate it, not decimate, devastate it we believe it's by half. raping of nuns and killing of children. And, so the population, 55,000 are estimated to have died in it. And the city, if you can believe, Rome was a whopping 30,000 people. That's nothing.
And over the course of how many days? How long did the sack?
6 months.
It was 6 months.
As I put in my example, like 6-month orgy of rape and pillage.
Can you imagine sustaining that kind of mob mentality
you mean like
6 months?
The uprising at the Capitol lasting all through the city and to every part of the city and every class of society, and you're jailing the Pope, and your troops are, they're running roughshod over people and literally just annihilating what is Rome, which had been the center of Christendom. And here it is, it's 1527, and Pope Julius had decided in 1502, I'm going to create the Rome of the emperors, and he restarts to rebuild St. Peter's. And it's, it's been under construction. It's looking sort of like the bottom of our U.S. Capitol. It's designed by Bramante, and it's got the circles and the squares and the classical tendencies to it. But then to just annihilate that, and the city would be laid waste for quite a while. And so what that does is it really kind of chops the career of my next 37-year-old kind of in half, because the next generation after the Ninja Turtles of Raphael and Leonardo and Michelangelo, the next one, I get ever more fascinated by this guy, by Parmigianino. It's Francesco Mazzola.
Right.
He was born in 1503. And he died in 1540.
Wait, let's back up. Francesco Mazzola is his name, and he was called
Parmigianino.
Little Parmigianino.
Because he's the little one from Parma.
He's the little cheesy guy.
He's all my students want to say he's cheesy. But he's the little boy. He's the Nino. He's the little Nino, one from Parma. And it's more fun. So yes, Girolamo Francesco Maria Mazzola of Parma.
Good gracious.
Why don't we just call him Parmigianino?
That would be easier.
The little one from Parma. and so, but thinking about this, he is a very fortunate soul in some respects, because he came up at a time when artists' stature has risen. They were nothing but craftsmen even just 100 years earlier. And here he is, and not only that, but he's so hideously precocious. Because if you were to look at any standard art history book, the two things you'll likely see is his, I'm going to say, infamous painting of the Madonna of the long neck. And it was painted, and it's actually, imagine this thing being 7 feet tall. We could probably go visit it and be even more. It's at the Uffizi, and I don't remember seeing it.
I don't remember seeing it either.
But here is the Madonna with the long neck, or of the long neck, and it was painted in the second half of the 1530s. But this is a style, literally a maniera. He's the very first of what we call the Mannerist
He's
artist.
the first.
Really, really is. And you can...
How do we account for it?
Well, I tend to think about the fact that you've got this art star. The other image that you'll see in Gardner's Art Through the Ages or what have you is the portrait, self-portrait that he did when he was 21. And here's an artist who is already stretching and pushing what vision can do and showing off his chops. Because if you were to ever gaze upon this self-portrait, it's like 9.5 inches in diameter, and it is literally on a convex piece of wood to emulate a convex mirror.
Hell's bells.
But he also paints himself as though he's holding his hand closer to the convex mirror. And so he has warped vision and sight, but he has put himself dead center.
Right.
And he's obviously a very lovely young man.
But that hand, good God.
Well, of course, because it's closer. Oof. And so he's playing with spatial depth and stretching things. And you can see him doing this already at age 21.
21. This is a painting that's in the Kunsthistorisches.
Kunsthistorisches. So, yes.
Vienna.
So 1524, 21, he's 21 years old. And he takes this and like maybe 5 other little paintings. And he wants to go show Clement VII, Pope Clement VII in Rome. Come on, you really do want to hire me, because I'm just all that in a bag of chips. And here he's the little one from Parma, comes and he shows his stuff off to the Pope, and the Pope's like, it's okay. Yeah, okay. So Parmigianino, is starting off in Rome, and he's gotten a couple little gigs, but then, bam, you've got the sack of Rome. It's 1527, and so many, the ones that didn't die, fled. And so he goes to Bologna, And it's in Bologna where he starts another set of works because he's found Ugo de Carpi, who is the wood carver that will translate his images into glorious woodcuts. And he's there for about 3 years, and then he moves back. But this guy is still a triple threat because, and Vasari, our beloved Vasari, who had written the biographies of the artists.
But he was the first Italian art historian.
Exactly. But Vasari had published that very first book of artist biographies in 1550. Mm-hmm. That tells you a lot because artists' biographies, it means we want to know who they are. It says everything, and even saying in the book, Michelangelo is regarded as godlike. He can make man out of stone. He's an exact peer. He's watching Michelangelo make work and being able to, how could he write a biography of Giotto, who was, painting in 1305.
Well, you wonder where he got his information.
Seriously. Like in a garage from Deep Throat. You got to wonder.
Were there tombstones even?
But he chose to write about these artists, and then it's literally published, as in text in books.
And he's codifying the whole shebang.
He really is. Now, he doesn't. It's interesting when you read about Michelangelo in this because he doesn't put the artist in the context of his time. And when I teach about Michelangelo saying, he was 33 or so when he finished the Sistine ceiling, that's a different guy than the guy who's 60 and finishes the Last Judgment in 1546, and he's in his early 60s, and the world has gone shit mad, and he does that self-portrait on the flayed skin of St. Bartholomew. Those are two different people. I always tell my students, you're going to be, I hope you're a different musician or a different artist 20 years from now, that you would have made yourself in a new way. But I think Vasari didn't quite put it that way. I'm going to do the old Søren Kierkegaard thing, that history is learned backwards but lived forwards. Because these guys don't know what's coming up. They don't know the next story. Hey, next is going to be the sacking of Rome. Next there's going to be a counter-reformation. Next there's going to be religious wars all across the European continent. Next they don't know any of that stuff. Like we know about, what is it now, 100,000 troops built up on the border of Georgia?
Right, Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukraine, right. And imagine this stuff falling out of the sky and just happening to you.
Also with the delay in delivery of news.
Absolutely.
Right? So you're like on tenterhooks.
How can you know? And then of course you have to add to that, coming out of the Middle Ages, that concept of maybe it's earned, maybe you sinned, maybe it's because you didn't live properly, maybe it's because there are demons and beasties out there that will kill you, that you could die from a scratch on the nose because anything could get infected and you'd be dead. It's amazing that anybody even freaking lived through, history, because not only is it dangerous out there, but humans are so mean. Some of them. So the point here is, though, that you've got Parmigianino, the little one from Parma, who was regarded in his day as Raphael reborn.
Oh, by Vasari or others?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And in his day, Vasari says people regarded him as Raphael reborn.
Huh.
So, because he's 17 when Raphael dies.
A child prodigy.
Yeah, and he'd already finished his first altarpiece when he was 17. The Bardi, you're just like, okay, so these guys got into art school early. And so then when he does this self-portrait, which I'm praying that you put up there for folks.
I shall.
It's just to understand how he is pushing and playing with vision and sight, and he's trotting out his abilities like, I know how to paint. I don't have to paint like Leonardo, like Raphael, like Michelangelo. I know how to paint, see? And what I'm going to do is do it in the manner of them, in the style. A manière, I believe it was Vasari that had said it, he called it the manière, the style. And Mannerism, which is this, some folks would say late Renaissance era artwork, suddenly human figures are so much longer. Longer necks, longer hands, fingers, smaller, worried faces. Their body positions change, and they're not these stable, gesund-looking people, but these otherworldly creatures that are elegant beyond belief, and yet very peculiar. And then the men grow 18 pecs and have more than pecs. They have pecs upon pecs, and it's this new stylishness of adapting what had been understanding all of the the numerical perfection of the human proportions and thinking about the Greco-Roman past and rebirthing. And it's like, well, that was already done, Those guys, those high-end boys did it, and now it's our time. We can emulate them, but we don't have to copy them. We're going to add our own special sauce. And that's the thing that Parmigianino adds to the mix right off the bat, which are these extremely long, attenuated figures. I'm having Anne look here at the Madonna of the long neck, and it's lovely. My friend, the not poker face, just like me, is looking at this
and scowling. It's bizarre.
Why is it bizarre, Anne?
Well,
if we were to compare this to the Raphael Madonna, like right next to it, what would startle you most about this image?
Well, the proportions of the human figures are really weird, and I wonder if it was meant to be seen from below, and maybe it foreshortens itself better. But the anatomy of the baby is so funky.
Well, that's okay. So many things are at work here. Head, hands, and feet are almost invariably tremendously elegant and showing off the artist's skill. And you look at the Virgin, and she has no halo. How the heck would you even know it's a Virgin?
She's wearing blue. That's the only reason.
Yeah, and yet I can see traces of Michelangelo. If you look at this position of this very large, scary-looking infant, looks slightly like an alien, slightly dead. Mm-hmm. But if you were to reverse the position of this child, suddenly you have what it was in the Pietà by Michelangelo. That same dangling arm and the splayed and across the mother's knees. So it's a way of prefiguring his foreshadowing his own death, and yet. It's almost, he's going to slide off that lap. It's really worrisome. She
has quite an ample bottom half.
Oh, indeed. Her hips must be, like, she could shoot out way more Christs if she wanted to. But she's got this absolutely beautiful face, all these lidded.
Angelic.
Angelic, and that's a Raphael-style face, right? And yet, when I teach it to my students at Peabody, and I say, now look at that hand, the long hand that's almost boneless that reaches beautifully up to that dimple just below where your voice box would be. And it's not even a gesture. It's just this sort of draping of a hand. What does it seem? And then you have to ask yourself, normally a person can play about an octave on a piano. And I ask my students, what do you think she can play with that hand? Maybe a 14th? Because it's like there's extra digits, and she has an extra vertebrae or two in her beautiful stylized long neck, and look at how long her feet are, and it's poking towards us. It's violating space.
Yeah, every bit of anatomy in it is weird.
And if you even look at, this is a very bodacious Virgin. If you think about the way that sash across her midriff is diagonally across her chest, which has completely taken this very clingy fabric to the point where it needs to drape right off of a very erect nipple. And then you start thinking, gosh, that reminds me of the Nike of Samothrace, but that sash is the exact same opposite as you would have seen in Michelangelo's Pietà.
Gotcha.
That's sneak. So he's quoting Raphael in the face, he's quoting Michelangelo's Pietà, but he's also pushing space and time, because instead of having some elegantly balanced triangular form, he's pushed all of the angels to one side, and they're all clustering in going, ooh, can I look at the new baby? Can I look at the new alien with this really strange little child that's going to fall off her lap? And it's like, and look, we brought you this bizarre long kind of vase full of I don't know what. And we're all shoved right into the corner here looking with our little cute, very pink cheeks. Yes. And look, my very long angelic leg is just down the side here. Weird. And it sort of parallels the Virgin. And then on the other side, you've got...
Very odd.
Well, what have you got? And you've got all these happy angels.
A door column that's going nowhere.
Well, it's not just one. It's actually...
Oh, I see.
It's column, oh. And it's a whole string of columns that look like they're going back like smokestacks, and you can see little shadows of each of those.
I need my glasses.
Anne's putting on her cheaters and starting to see that Mannerism is the gateway drug to the Baroque. I finally came to realize what this is about, pushing space and making these figures do weird and interesting things. So down here, and opposite what do we have? 4 little angels all smooshed into one side. If it were high Renaissance, it would have been 2 and 2, right? Unless you could have equaled out the scale, a level thing. But over here, instead of the angels, we got this whole bizarre smokestack line of columns that don't support anything, and then this little bitty figure which in some texts I've seen called Isaiah. It's an old guy kind of holding up a scroll. He's sort of wearing a toga-ish sort of thing. And he's holding up a scroll as though he's predicting that this new Messiah dude will come. Others have said it's like St. Jerome, but either way, it's sort of like a prophet.
And he's looking off stage.
But he's looking off stage. You know, he's holding the scroll towards her, like, look, there they are, pointing to her and them, but then going, hey, y'all. It's shouting to whom in what space. And so we have this peculiar spatial plunge all the way to the back, and there's no real balance. That's the other thing that the Mannerist works will do, is they stir the pot. Their compositions tend to be either centripetal or centrifugal. They don't have this stability of like, there's a triangle and it sits nice and solidly on its bottom. It looks like you've literally, I mean, if you could put a spoon right in the middle of this painting where her navel is and start moving it around, you'd start mixing around all these ingredients, and that's where all those angels and smokestacks would end up. And if you do that with another Mannerist painting and you start realizing that they're circling and they're pushed to the edges of the composition and they're standing in the most bizarre positions that you cannot physically replicate. It's about movement. It's about the design of it. It's echoing the excellence of the high masters, but adding your own special sauce in such a way that...
Well, it's adding life.
It's adding, yes, and emotion. Oftentimes it could be very sweet, but if you were to look at other Mannerist painters like Pontormo, and they have worried faces and they're tiny, and it's like a pantomime of worriedness, and you never saw that at all.
No.
In the Renaissance, it was like, hello, this is...
Here we are.
Indeed, there's a birth.
And here
How
are
nice.
the donors.
And there we are, and let's behave.
Yes.
And the Mannerists are just almost...
Suddenly they're recognizing emotion.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's...
After the sack of Rome.
Yeah.
When shit goes to hell in a handbasket.
Shit goes sideways, and it's like, okay, well, we can depict that too. We could show even more, and in a way, some of the anatomy is very specific, and in some ways, it's very impossible, but it's always so elegant, and it's so beautifully crafted. There was the longest time I couldn't stand to look at this, and I'm spending a lot of time on this painting because it informs a lot of how we'll see Parmigianino's other work, which is print-based, because what his fame was spread, of course, not by his paintings, but by his prints throughout the world. Now, we remember him because, art history students for generations have gone, look at the lady with the long neck and the nipply and the that's just really weird. And the colors are all strange and sort of secondary and odd as opposed to calming.
And the Madonna with the long neck was painted for a chapel in Parma, his home.
Yeah, it eventually got...
And it got to the Uffizi, but the donors are missing.
Oh yeah,
which is a change.
Yeah. And there's all of, but see, that's the other thing about the sack of Rome, is that the whole infrastructure is shot to hell. Because the church has been, up to this point, one of your chief donors, where you can really, you paint for the church and you get paid by them, you do your work for them. But who's left
I think of them as the organizing structure of society.
Well, they are, but they've been sacked.
Right.
Right? Because, they're just dithered. And so what's left? Well, it's people with money. The ones that didn't die, the one that have their nice little duchies, their little castles.
They could hide somewhere.
And they can still get their...
They went to the countryside for the duration.
Yes. And the 1% went and got their pretty stuff. And they could... And the other thing about looking at any Mannerist painting, it wasn't necessary for it to be a literal translation of the story in as many earlier Renaissance things would have kind of, this is the way we've come to recognize a story. It might be more symbolic.
Yeah.
It might set up a different kind of attention where the family that ended up getting to commission this particular Madonna of the Long Neck will say, now, why does the baby look so dead? Is it that it's both foreshadowing, but also, and so that it becomes this intellectual game. And that means that we start to notice that who can afford artwork in this time of need? Well, then the church is a mess and can't get its act together. Well, it's the courts, people with money and major businessmen. So if we're talking about anybody that's in the Catholic realm, these painters, painting like the Bronzino was painting for the Medici. They still stuck around.
Well, those Bronzinos are amazing.
Well, yeah, but they're also ridiculous. And they're also weirdly sexualized.
Yes, but they're beautiful.
And they are knockout. They're unbelievably beautifully painted. This Mannerist thing is that it really starts in Rome, and your very first indicator of this is our boy Parmigianino, the little one from Parma. And he's started to stretch these figures out, and there are others that climb on that bandwagon. And then if you start thinking about Parmigianino making prints, not only does he have Carralho in Rome, who's been engraving his images, and we used to show our students a Diogenes that was engraved by Carralho. But then when he goes down to Bologna, he picks up Antonio da Trento, and he's kicking out all these great chiaroscuro woodcuts for Parmigianino. And then Parmigianino picks up his own damn etching scribe and is the first to actually really be the first etcher. Because if you think about it, we've only really talked about engravings, right?
Reproductive.
Well, just engravings, anybody, Schongauer, Montaigne, any of those boys. Okay. And we mentioned etching with Dürer. Dürer frustratedly tried to etch like 6 plates on iron in about 1519. And he went, fuck this. This is stupid. There's no precision. It's awful.
Wait, so who figures out the...
Parmigianino's the first one to be etching on copper.
He figured out the magic elixir.
Somehow, he's got this. And here's another funny little wrinkle that was added to my knowledge base. Because really, I kind of skipped over this guy way too much. And I've come to realize those weird restatements of great masterworks, I've done Mannerists twice now. I did the Let Me Take You Down, the Beatles taking John Lennon down based on the Pontormo.
Oh.
And then I did another Mannerist one, the Bronzino and woodcut. This is what I try and tell my students. Pay attention to those things you jot down in your notebook. And why do I keep going back to those things? And we're talking 20 years of actually recreating Mannerist things, not high Renaissance things.
Right.
Which really, and all the falling figures things I did. It's like, it's these guys that one day I'm like, oh, of course, Mannerism is the gateway drug to the Baroque. It's that way station. It's how we figure out to add the verve and the crazy composition, the twisting figures and the emotion and the stylishly long everything, right? You can never be too thin or too rich or too mannered, right? Because all of these people in these Mannerist images look like they're the most elegant women ever, or the guys that have been working out so much that even their earlobes have muscles.
Oh, gosh.
And I'm right when we get to Hercules and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So our boy Parmigianino is this new kind of Raphael reborn, and he lives a whopping 37 years old. And
that's amazing.
Well, isn't that just kind of sick?
It is kind of sick that they could find their métier that early and produce so much work that they become the figureheads of their movements.
Right. And then they didn't know they were going to be doing that either. They just knew it's like, how do I get my stuff out there? How to get people to hire me? What do I do? And here's this 21-year-old like, I'm a fucking badass painter. I'm going to make this thing. Check this out. And I think about that when I show this alabaster Madonna nursing an infant Christ that Michelangelo did when he was 15. And he did the Pietà when he was 23. But these guys didn't have to spend a lot of time on their iPhones either. So they could really spend their time at church or learning, reading, becoming an intelligent, educated human being, because that's a gift.
But I love the idea of Parmigianino looking back to his forebears and understanding that he needs to create something new within the confines of donor paying for the work or whatever, the church, that he gets it, that he's...
It started to make me think about what it is to be in the music industry and what's the next hook.
Exactly.
And it's as timely as that. How can you tap into what's going to happen? So that's why when we start thinking about what Parmigianino is doing, and not only is this oil painter, but then if we were to pay attention to, if you were to tell it in order, he would have an engraver, Carralho, do engravings of his images, like this Diogenes that we were so fond of. But then he realized, the Italians really, when it comes to woodcuts, most of the Italians that we're going to be paying attention to think of them as book illustrations or want their woodcuts to emulate ink wash drawings. And that's where Parmigianino is so freaking smart, because he's... What's the print that we show our students and they always go, oh, every time. And it's that Parmigianino that we just love so much.
The Diogenes.
Oh, yeah.
With no line work at all.
None. And you can tell that it was an image that was created with ink wash on a surface. And it's interesting also because we could compare it to the same air quotes, composition that Parmigianino had done and handed off to Coralio. And Coralio,
In the engraving.
had included all kinds of extra forms that are written into the book. He's paid much more attention to the details in the hair.
Well, it's
featherless
fussier, right?
Yeah, oh yeah, but
Right.
it's what a group of engraving collectors would want. More visual data, right? Mm-hmm. But when we think about the way that Parmigianino has created this Diogenes, who is this 4th century skeptic who thinks humans are stupid and they're featherless bipeds. They're as dumb as that plucked chicken that's standing right next to him.
Right.
The students always think, why is there a chicken next to him? It's like, oh, why didn't you read the text? It's in there. But there's this chicken like standing there plucked right next to Diogenes, who's in this glorious torsion. He's seated, but look at, old dude, but old muscular dude. Come on, talk to me about that.
Well, and is that, I always thought that cloak was being just sort of
blown
or flung around him, or he's twisted and sat down.
So the drapery that's billowing behind his wonderfully flowing gray locks is adding, it's a way of highlighting the figure even more.
God, look at his forearm. Jesus.
I know, they're just like scrumptious, right? It's like this guy has been a bricklayer or a blacksmith. He's got these fantastic muscular arms.
He's been a printmaker.
Yeah, yes, he has. And he's clutching something to his chest, and he's got this torque in his body so that we see his massive thigh running down to his beautifully drafted feet. And he's sitting there looking at a book, and he's a skeptic philosopher. I don't need anything. And he renounces all of his worldly goods, including once he sees the shepherd boy drinking water out of his hands, he goes, I don't even need this cup. Pop! Throws that away too. So, he's given up everything, and he lives in a barrel. That's all you need. Here we have Parmigianino coming up with this figure, and it's rendered, the version we would show our class was in a kind of a medium brown and a kind of an ochre, and then one other dark brown.
Right.
On paper, and the paper is like the 4th color in the image. And the one you see illustrated more often in books is the one in Linda Holt's. It's done in these interesting shades of green. Mm-hmm. There's this marvelous sort of sagey green, and then a middle, not even an olive green, but then there's a blue, deeper, deep blue green. And so you've got these 3 colors, and then the color of the paper, which helps add that 3rd element. And so it really does start looking like an ink wash drawing. Right. Oh, wait, isn't that disegno?
Yes.
So it's still showing off the artistry of how to compose this figure. But look at that. Nobody makes figures like that. But maybe where do you suppose Parmigianino might, who makes big, bulky, gorgeous figures like this?
Well, I would say Michelangelo.
I certainly would too, wouldn't you? You could say, he looks
straight off the ceiling.
Absolutely. Like all of those gratuitous ignudes, those nice strapping lads, those ones that are all in their early 20s that are paired all the way across. But here's this older gent who's obviously so buff.
But Michelangelo always did that, right? Like he would have these, it was almost like he had this figure type that was a young buff guy, and he would pop boobs and a woman's head on it, or an old man's head. Or
I was thinking about that too, and it's still that issue of Michelangelo understanding the human body and having done the dissection and completely getting it. But he really wasn't a student of how breasts are attached to the female rib cage.
No.
Michelangelo here. But he does need to put all those ignudi. He's an interesting guy. So, but they're idealized to a point, but because they're all big, beautiful, heroic, as you would see them in Greco-Roman past. But here Parmigianino is given it an even more torsion. It almost looks like the figure got twisted just that much more. And it's so artful. And what it is it's art about art. Think about it. He's making art about the art that was made about something. And as we move along in this century, you start to see that artists are paying attention to what it is they're making in reference to the past more, and how to, it's just really self-referential.
The Laocoon is the classic twist composition, right?
And you can really see it starting to happen in this one. And it's interesting to think about Parmigianino being smart enough to go, okay, I'm going to make these brush and ink sketches, and then I find myself, in the case of the person who carved these 3 blocks, he had enlisted this guy, Ugo de Carpi, what a great name, to be his carver for these, specifically for the Diogenes and a few other images. And what's interesting is that Ugo de Carpi had created this. It's really stunning. Anything else you want to tell? It's also large.
It is.
But if you remember, the print was probably at least 22 by maybe
was it?
30. Yeah.
Oh, I don't remember it being that big.
It was a good-sized print.
Yeah, it was big.
And it was 2 sheets of paper joined.
Oh, right.
It was a big piece of paper.
It was a big piece of paper.
And ours was in shades of brown, and this is in shades of green, which also tells you either that they're doing a reprint, or it's so successful that they carve another set of blocks.
You don't think that they're just experimenting with different colorways?
Oh, yeah, I do. All the time. I think they're changing it all the time.
Because there's so many variations.
Well, and that's also interesting because how popular is an image? Now, there's no such thing as an editioned print in the day. It's like what sells, right? So here, Ugo de Carpi's got this glorious Diogenes, and he's got it in engraving, much smaller for the engraving crowd that wants to collect that. And then this really lovely, the invenzione on this, the disegno of this is really quite thrilling. And that would be another audience. And then let's say that run sells out, so then they do a second printing, not thinking, oh, it has to be so different, but yeah, let's try a different array of colors. And it could be that they carve different blocks. The thing that's so interesting to me about how the Italian chiaroscuro woodcuts, and that's what we call them, chiaroscuro, I don't think I even said that yet, chiaroscuro woodcuts, and that's really specific. Chiare is light, oscuro to obscure, so it's light dark. This high contrast, wonderfully valued scene is something that Ugo de Carpi really believes that he invented. Well, he invented the Italian kind. He goes and he petitions in 1516 and say, I invented this and I want my name. It's like Cafe Hun. This is mine. I'm trademarking it. And they pretty much had to say, well, it's a nice thing, Ugo. You've done a fine job. But in fact, folks, Cranach the Elder probably invented it in the north. It's their version of it in 1509.
So 30 years earlier?
No, maybe
20?
7.
7, oh, okay.
But
that's Lucas Cranach.
Lucas Cranach the Elder. So, but if you were to compare the Italian chiaroscuro woodcuts to a northern chiaroscuro woodcut, in the north there's a key block. It's black. It's got all the lines. It's super clear, and that image would read if you only printed just the black key block. But there's a second block, which is done in the case of the image we're looking at, which is a St. Christopher. It's a kind of lovely rust-colored orange that's printed first, and then the key block goes on second, and then the white of the paper comes through, and that's what gives you the poofs of the cloud and the highlights on the helmet. It's a very clean, what you would expect, sort of a Germanic kind of clarity.
Well, and Cranach, or whoever carved it for Cranach, has carved in line, like cross hatching and lines to get you more tone, where as the Italian example is really much more fluid.
Much more fluid, much more painterly. And again, and the reason I have this pairing here also is because you can see the northern sense of the human body and its structure compared to the Italian. What I show my students is a pairing of Lucas Cranach the Elder's chiaroscuro woodcut from 1509 of St. Christopher on one side, and on the right-hand side I'll show them Ugo de Carpi's. There's a St. Jerome that was actually drawn by Titian, none other than Mr. Titianus, and I even show the Parmigianino next to that. And you can see how these two processes can be so widely different, number one. And if I were to ask you to compare this northern St. Christopher carrying Christopher, the guy Christopher, he's carrying Christ, to, let's say, St. Jerome, who's sitting here looking very mighty, another buff, older guy, beating on his chest with a rock, because that's what St. Jerome is supposed to do. That's his attribute. And he's driving out, in salacious thoughts.
Well, it's kind of interesting, because on the two impressions that we're looking at, the coloring is pretty similar. So it's sort of an ochre with the black and the white of the paper, or whatever the paper cream. The thing that's remarkable is the way that they have carved the bodies, the musculature and the anatomy. The St. Christopher carrying the little Christ child, like that foreleg that's coming out it looks like a mannequin leg sticking out from under crap or something.
Well, you see that the northern artists are paying attention to all the surface detail.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh yeah, all the toes are there and the crinkliness of it. And
Cool city behind them.
yeah, but it's the structure underneath that connects all this stuff. That the Italians kind of show you the framework, the skeleton under the flesh, and that's why the Titian holds together so beautifully.
Much more convincing.
There's a bellows of a chest, and I'm not being swayed by beautiful drapery, but
On those triceps.
well, yeah. It's great to see guys my age looking that buff. And so here we have these two images by Ugo de Carpi, both of them chiaroscuro woodcuts after drawings by great masters. So the Titian, in one case, you can see a key block that's black, and that the orange or ochre block, he's made cross cuts across the thigh so that it creates this sense of volume on the figure. But then when you get to the later one of the Ugo de Carpi doing Parmigianino, about 1527, there are no lines whatsoever. All of these different blocks are used to give us this sense of brushwork, of really things blending together, a remarkable softness, and yet terribly structural. It gives you all of the anatomical landmarks. It has all of the strength and virtue necessary, and it really holds together, and you can feel the spiraling of this figure. And I can see why Ugo de Carpi was tremendously proud of the way he has managed to take a wash drawing and turn it into a reproducible image in a number of different colors. This is one of those big ones that just goes down through time. However, Ugo does do other carvings for our friend, the little one from Parma. But the other guy that Parmigianino works with and hires when he has to run down to Bologna after the sack of Rome is Antonio da Trento, who apparently actually lived in his house in those 3 years that he was living down there.
I never really thought that much about Parmigiani. In fact, when I took 101, Art History 101, I, for some reason, missed the Madonna of the Long Neck day.
Well, okay, and that's just it. You could have missed that one day, but I've come to realize that this Mannerist, it becomes an international mode of representation, and we'll explain why. But and we're dwelling on this guy, and I understand also, like, we never heard about this guy before. Sort of like you could blink and you'd miss the Rococo too,
right?
Because it's eminently forgettable. But you realize that they're both of a type, because both of them are coming off of this period of enormity. And so if I think about art history as a sine wave, and you got the glory that was Greece and the grandeur that was Rome, and then you got the Gothic era, that's shit. If you're thinking about Western canon, right? And then you go, oh, the Renaissance, we've got the Renaissance, and it's great, but then it goes down to Mannerism. And then, ooh, here comes the Baroque, and it's good and strong, and it's referring to Greco-Roman again, and it gets all this down into the Rococo, and then, oh dear, and it's shallow and awful, and then all it's back up to the neoclassical, and that's da-da-da-da, and then, you could say that you've got the Romanticism, which brings back, you could go up and down with this sine curve, and I can really see how hardliners would say, the Gothic is Drek, so they're barbarians, they're not us. The Mannerists are terrible, they're the Trumps who can afford artwork, commissioning artists who have tons of skill and are actually still having just as much invenzione as the Ninja Turtles had. But I started realizing this is a movement that's going all across Europe, and Parmigianino, one of the reasons that happens is because he's also figured out, I've got Caralio. Well, okay, he croaks probably in the sack of Rome, but still, those engravings are out there. And
Caralio dies in the sack of Rome?
Yeah, he lost his engraver in that. So then he kind of turns his focus to these chiaroscuro woodcuts. And so he's got Ugo de Carpi, which is just too much fun to say. But then he starts working with Antonio da Trento, who is down in Bologna. And as I said, Antonio da Trento it's said that he was living in his house, very tight together. And one of the ways that if you really wanted to see fabulous chiaroscuro woodcuts, you would look at this incredible catalog with the show that was, as Anne will tell you, this whole thing was put together by
Naoko Takahatake.
See, because she can do that super fast.
Yeah, no, she's worked on this project for years and years.
Years and years and years.
Yep.
And it was an exhibition that was down at
LA County.
Yes, it was at LA County. It was at the National Gallery of Art.
Yes.
And, well, the reason I know about that is because Linda Stieber Marinas, who was a curator and studying the inks at the Library of Congress got me involved, and I ended up printing all these test plates for this thing, which was in 2009. Right. And that was all the way back in 2009, and then all of a sudden this catalog comes out. Not all of a sudden. I mean, it really tells you how long
it takes.
To get something to happen. So this was...
I know you all think we're all sitting twiddling our thumbs.
But it really does. And it
takes a long time.
It was an amazing exhibition.
I missed it. I don't know how.
Are you kidding me?
I don't know how I missed it.
Well, anyway, so I showed him how to print these things, and the whole point was talking about the way these inks were made and how different inkings would create these different appearances.
I mean, it's not just as simple as a pigment. There's different qualities.
It's okay. How do you make your spaghetti sauce? I add celery. No, you never add celery. I mull it with linseed oil. No, I add this. And Linda Stieber-Marinas, my God, the charts and graphs she made, and there was another printmaker that's legendary in the DC area who was mulling all the inks for her. I ended up helping her print them over at Pyramid Atlantic with this press, because I finally said, no, it wasn't a letterpress. And I got real adamant about it, and then so I brought Ryan Ives in on it, and then we were printing.
It was one of those.
It was more like a wine press, yes. And so we worked on that, and then the exhibition comes out, and all of these gorgeous chiaroscuro woodcuts from both above and below the Alps are exhibited. I'm showing Ann a 2-page spread right here of the
from
exact
the catalog,
of the exact same composition in 3 different inkings, and we used to show our students 2 of them. And then I make them sit there, and I make them look at it. Yeah. And so this is the martyrdom of Saints Peter and St. Paul. And so all of these chiaroscuro woodcuts are coming from the second half of the 1520s when he's down in Bologna. What is interesting is that, Parmigianino's found this guy that will translate his wash drawings into the look of what it's supposed to look like. And so there's another bit of dirt on this. After Antonio de Trento has done these remarkable chiaroscuro woodcuts, meaning, if we look at one version of this, you've got a dark block and a medium block and then a fairly light block and the color of the paper to create the scene of Saints Peter and Paul being brought before Emperor Nero.
Yeah, sort of a khaki brown color.
Yeah, sitting on a throne halfway up, and he's pointing at go kill these boys, but he's looking off the opposite direction. Wait a minute, we just saw that in that Madonna, right? This business of one facet of the body facing one way and the other facing the opposite direction, redirecting the eye to different parts of the composition.
So in the center, really low, that's Paul, who's about to be beheaded, right? And then just above him in the center
is Saint Peter.
Right.
But he's actually, this is a misnomer because he's not being martyred at the time. He's going to be led off, and they're going to crucify him upside down, which is, of course, crucifixion being the most wretched way to die. And here are, 2 of the disciples being sacrificed in front of this horrific Emperor Nero. He's got the columns and the high throne of his Roman.
He's not burning the city yet?
Not yet, but look, we have angels flying overhead, and we have swooping drapery.
It's an interesting sort of reminder that the Christendom was burgeoning something, and that the Roman emperors were like, "What the hell are you doing?" And get the hell out. It was
Constantine who finally went,
right.
This whole thing's gonna kind of fall apart unless I say, "Oh gosh, I was helped by God in Christ," in 330. So, but if you were to look at this Mannerist, you can see that the center, there's the figure at the center, but it's almost like a windshield wiper. It's like the activity of this is being forced outward. We have one version that's in an array of browns. We have another version that's done with some browns, but then there's one terracotta, which is incredibly effective. Mm-hmm. And then there's one in 3 different greens. And what we would do, you remember this one from when we show the students. So we have this pale green and then
it really changes it, doesn't it?
Oh my God, yes. So then we would show it to them and say, okay, so what's the difference? They just use different blocks. I said, did they? And then they have to pick it apart, and they start realizing that one had a border all the way around it, and there were the most subtle little changes.
There were changes, right? There were 2 different sets of blocks.
2 completely separate sets of blocks.
Right.
Again, to show us how savvy this Parmigianino kid was. right? It's like, okay, I got my engraver doing my thing. I figured out my stretched out figures. Okay, I've got these beautiful chiaroscuro woodcuts that, and there are tons more of these that you can see in this wonderful catalog of the chiaroscuro woodcut in Renaissance Italy. It's a National Gallery of Art catalog.
Publication.
And it's really stunning. And boy, everybody in this era is so damn lucky to have all of these delicious color plates. Because when I was coming up,
Oh, I know, right?
these miserable little
Yeah, you
gray.
used to have to choose which plates you were going to do in color. It was a
Right.
pain in the ass. They all had to be together.
But now you can really see how an artist would completely change the appearance of something by the slice of colors that they would do if they did it in an array of greens or in an array of browns, and how different that would be.
Right.
So it's still showing the disegno and the colorito, if you will, and even the invenzione of an artist. But now these think about it, these are color woodcuts. Those are affordable. You know, they take registration, but you could have artwork in your life. You know?
I find it fascinating. I mean, I understand why engravings are held to a higher whatever price point, but really, why? Like, you know what I mean? Like, why?
Now you're singing my song.
Right.
So, of course, but this is coming from an etcher and a woodcutter.
Right.
But that's, okay, so now we've talked about the chiaroscuro woodcut and how wonderfully different an image could be. Just even, if you play with your TV. And in the old days when you could play with your TV or your freaking phone and you put different filters.
Photoshop, yeah, filters, right.
Well, now I just want to think about an artist who's savvy enough who says, wait a minute, there's this other thing. I'm going to try this. It's kind of cool. And the painter picks up an etching needle and he starts etching. He starts drawing on a copper plate that's been covered with acid-resistant covering, it could be like tar-like, we call it asphaltum in my world. And he is able to just draw his images directly through this. He's sort of like using a magic slate, kind of like that. You just sort of you scratch it on there with your wiggly jiggly line, and you can make this image appear. And what you've done is pulled the acid resist off of the copper, and you can see my drawing, and it is by the artist's own hand. It is autograph. It is his mark.
Because it's easy enough to scribe through the ground.
A completely different world than this very structured world of engraving, which has been so controlled and has now become so systematized already by the 1520s, because it's like, oh, we can use that for reproducing artworks. It's not like, hey, I think I'll make an engraving, unless you're, of course, Dürer. But that's on the other side of the Alps. So here comes this kid, and I'm going to call Parmigianino a kid, because he never stops. This is what I've come to realize. It's like, oh yeah, no, Parmigianino, bleh. This guy's smart, like Dürer smart. He's already gone through engraving. He's got the chiaroscuro woodcut, and now he's trying this brand new thing called that we call etching, right? And he's scribing. Now, he made 16 or 17 etchings in his lifetime, but that was his ticket, buddy. People knew his etchings way better than his paintings all the way into the 18th century, because you could see the artist's hand at work. You could see his disegno. You could see his actual drawing, which to me is fascinating. So the image that we would show in class is something that's called the Entombment. Parmigianino etched this, he scribed it onto a copper plate in about 1530. And it's an image, literally, of the entombment of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. We showed them this, and I'd forgotten how it's actually pretty large for etching.
It's pretty big.
Yeah, it's 13 inches tall by about 9 inches wide. Now, I'm going to ask Anne to explain to you the kinds of things she's noticing in this entombment of Christ.
Well, I feel like I always answer with the wrong thing. But the composition is kind of bizarre, because Christ it's almost like he's on a lab table or a dissection table, and he's surrounded by people. So he's center. Mm-hmm. Underneath him is sort of nothing in a little bush. Mm-hmm. And the people, there's a figure to the left. I don't know who that is. John the Baptist, I guess. I don't know.
gesturing and
then a crowd of women behind him on the right.
Swooning and looking worried and having their heads at various angles, and someone's got a hand up, oh my God, blocking the pain from, trying to keep the pain from themselves. And the figure on the left-hand side is all smushed to that left-hand side, exactly like those angels were.
Right.
In that Madonna of the long neck. And what you see is that everything's been pushed again out, as you say. The composition's totally bizarre. It's weird. Not balanced. It's not stable, but it's balanced.
Yeah, it doesn't bug me.
Right.
It's just different.
But, what's really fun, when I try to teach my drawing students, like, let's pay attention to how this thing is set up. Like, if we were to draw a line through this and a line through here, and I say, okay, now let's take a look at this. Well, I'll bet you fat money that's right about where the golden mean spot is, right there. I'll bet you fat money that it's there. However...
God, do you think they were paying attention?
Oh, God, yes.
Shit.
Of course they were. But he's done that same thing where the figures are all clustered. They're not even touching him. In fact...
who's holding him up?
Exactly. What you say about a lab table is perfect.
Right.
Because it's talk about an altar. Talk about spreading that body onto an altar for consumption.
Well, his feet are crossed.
And look how tiny they are. There's that arm again from Michelangelo, but look how tiny the head is, how broad the chest is. And yet you can see this nervous, jittery line coming right off that scribe. I mean, he has written this drawing, right? There's nothing standing between him and the image that he's creating on the plate. This is absolutely his mark. And that to me is so exciting.
Well, and there's a lot of a range of darks and lights, and it's, as you will hear us say over and over again, it's all line. Like, there's no aquatint at this point.
They haven't invented that yet.
No, of course not. So it's when you get in there and you see these cross hatchings and different patterns in etching, which has been formulaic in engraving already.
Yeah.
But he's still figuring it out in etching.
We have not seen this. We saw Dürer trying to do it, and what Dürer was doing was drawing a woodcut. If we were to put a Dürer next to this image, because this really is the next etching that we see.
Right.
And you realize this is the dude that figured out, there's this cool thing called etching. I don't even have to hand it off to an engraver.
I like him.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Right? and that's just it. So I was realizing, okay, one of the reasons the chiaroscuro woodcuts work is because he could literally paint onto the block, and the carver could carve around the marks that he made. With an engraver, he's translating a drawing. But with an etching, it is absolutely like you are writing this picture, right? And in fact, that just made a little thing.
Ba-ding in your head?
Yeah, because
happens sometimes.
You write an icon. In ancient Greece, there was no word for painting.
What?
You would write an icon. I met a Philip Davidov at the exhibition that I put on of those Russian icons.
Right.
You write an icon. There was no word in ancient Greece for painting.
What?
And he is literally, if you look at this, doesn't it look like he is writing, like almost in cursive?
Yeah.
You can see the fluidity of this mark, and you can see why people in the 18th century were just like, oh my God, drawing is what it's about, because painting is great. No, painting is a finished product. Drawing is everything on the way. It tells you more of a story.
Well, and it tells you more about the artist and the artist's hand, which I think people now probably forget.
Yes, they do.
That the drawing is
invenzione, the disegno.
Well, it's the starting point.
And then if you actually take a look at each of these little faces that are in this image, this woman who's swooning backwards, which very well be the Virgin Mary. Put on your cheaters, Ann. It'll be okay. But you see how far back she's swooned. So we're looking up her chin, up her face. She's literally falling backwards. Maybe somebody's catching her. And then this cluster of aged men all looking so worried, and there's a new sense of urgency and perhaps terror. But we can't see anybody supporting him. It's almost as though, I thank you for saying, it's like a lab table. There's something symbolic about laying this meat out.
Yeah, it's a specimen.
To be consumed. And that's literally the concept of the story of Christ giving himself as a sacrifice. Right. And so these kinds of interpretations, that's one of the things that this Parmigianino dude does beautifully. And his etchings are the next step. And if you think about it, then if you look at these marks, Anne, you can see Rembrandt in them.
Ooh! Holy cow.
That's 100 years later.
Not RVR.
Uh-huh.
Hold on now.
But this is a guy
Yes, that's definitely in this
Oh,
bush.
totally,
Oh,
right?
for sure.
Right? And then, thank you. See,
In these faces.
can you see it? And
Yes,
you can
I
see
can
that
see
some
it.
places of absolute focus and some places where
Wait till we get to Rembrandt.
Well, and he's 100 years later. So, but how does he know? What could give him this idea? Maybe he had a piece of paper that had hit a plate that was.
Because he collected.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
As any self-respecting artist would.
And he actually had quite a print collection.
I think he did,
and
right?
he owned some Dürers, but he also.
There's they know what he had.
Yes, they do, because when he went bankrupt, that's another sad story. It's another
Okay,
week.
well, we'll just get to that later.
However, but my point to you on this is just that here's an artist, a painter, who we can laugh at his elongated weird babies, but he's smart enough that he starts an entire wave of new ways of depicting things, and other guys will be doing it as well. Pontormo and Giulio Romano and my buddy Bronzino, where
Yes, there's a bunch of them.
compositions are going to be invented and strange. The human body will be distorted and extended and attenuated and pushed to places it shouldn't go, but it's fascinating, and we understand it to be that way. And these prints go all over Europe. It's this stuff. It's like these 16, 17 etchings that Parmigianino did. Those are going all over Europe. This new form, etching, because he didn't have to carve it in there with a burin. He could bite it in acid. Yes. The chemicals would do the work. And you can see that he even did a set of marks, bit it in the acid, regrounded the plate, did a second set of marks so that it has different levels of depth of mark. And it's, really attractive. And then you start thinking, okay, so then why in his biographies do they say, well, later in life he really turned to alchemy and to...
Alchemy?
And to magic. And I'm like, it's because he's a fucking printmaker and he wants to figure out a better acid, you dipshit.
That's hilarious.
Come on. He's like, what more can I do with this? How do I make... It's that he's experimenting.
But the thing that I really am now, by your dissertation on him, turned on to is that this idea that you can, by sheer exaggeration, you can compel people to feel more, that it's because it stops you in your track. You're like, why is that like that? That you you get engaged faster than something that's super stable and lovely and beautiful. Mm-hmm. That this is like it's a brain tickler.
Mm-hmm. It's a head scratcher.
Yeah.
And you're like, why do they look like that? And then you have to stop.
Right.
Right? And it's
brilliant.
It's really freaking smart.
He's Dürer too.
He's 37 when he dies. And then you think about, okay, this is what I do when I'm driving. And I'm like, okay, so I have to talk to Anne tonight. And I'll put some ideas together. 37 years old. What does he do? Mozart, Caravaggio.
Mozart was 37?
37, 39. He's 1751. No.
It's amazing, these young lives.
He died in 1791.
It's almost like they know.
And Van Gogh, 39.
Yes.
And Caravaggio. So
right.
This guy, Parmigianino, lives as long as Caravaggio did. And if you think about what Caravaggio did for the following century in terms of Caravaggisti and how people would, the super dark and the tenebrism, it's amazing to me.
Well, it's kind of there already.
Uh-huh.
He just doesn't go quite as dark.
Right. But this is the first etching.
Well, right.
And he's freaking doing it. And he's like, what happens if I do this? If I do this? Oh, but look, here's my drawing. Print them.
Printmaking rocks.
Right. And it is really easy to laugh at how terrifying that baby looks in the Madonna of the Long Neck.
Well, that is true.
It's really terrifying. But you also look
creepy.
at the elegance of some of the other things that he painted, and they're really extraordinary. The way he moves his brush across a surface is just as beautifully modeled as a Leonardo.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a Parmigianino in person.
Oh, they're really interesting. And you think about the guys that follow.
Are we adding the Uffizi on? I mean, I've been there, but I wasn't paying attention because I was irritated with my graduate school class.
Oh, so is that
day.
what we're going to do for your significant birthday? Is that where we're going?
The Uffizi?
Yeah.
Sure.
Deal. So the thing you need to keep in mind when you're looking at our friend Parmigianino, there's one that's called The Lovers that Parmigianino does, and it's another like stunning. It's not biblical. It's The Lovers. It's a pair of people.
That's bizarre. Like that. Have we? I mean, the Emoti, right?
Right. But this is The Lovers and it's wholesome too.
What?
So here they are. This is actually at the Met. We're looking at a plate that's at the Met, and it's again a very Mannerist composition. But I can tell it's Italian.
Yes.
Now, why can I
You
tell that's
can.
Italian? And this is in the same zone. It's like 1527 to
Okay.
1530.
Why? Well, I mean, we've got an off-kilter composition.
So everything is like, if you took the letter K and reversed it,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like the whole composition is where all the legs of the K come together.
And her belly button.
Right. And the lovers, but they're locked in a
But they look like they're looking past each other
maybe.
today.
But oh, look at that torque. That's sort
The
of like
torque is
like Diogenes
I'm into you,
twisty,
for
totally.
sure.
And then, but the diagonal of their bodies is completely counterposed to the
Right,
angle of
tree
the
trunk.
tree.
Sure.
And but also this careful acknowledgement of nature and the little leaves and how it fills in these various
It's kind
spaces.
of northern in the nature thing.
And it tells you there's a guy that's like figuring it all out. He's really figuring it all out. And this is, again, he's writing this picture of these lovers. It doesn't need to be a painting. It's all right there.
Oh, that's cool. We got to see that in person.
The idea, again, with Parmigianino, this maniera, this style, this elegance, this, and in a way, artifice, this beautiful kind of dance of love in this case, or this dance of laying the body of Christ out onto the slab. I thought about, as I'm driving around today, I'm like, okay, how do we make this comparison? If we compare the Parmigianino very Mannerist composition of an entombment, literally putting the Lord Jesus into a tomb, and we think about the way that Parmigianino has staged this theater versus Montagne's version some 50 years earlier. And there was an entombment of Christ, and as you had pointed out, and you seem to sometimes have, and I did too, have a hard time finding the body of Christ
never
at
find
first.
Christ.
But what do you immediately notice about this entombment from like 1475 to this one from 1530, let's say?
Well, it's really, I mean, it's the composition. So there's this sort of mountain behind the central figure, who I don't know who that is. And it kind of splits everything in two.
As in perfectly balanced.
it all
Like you could take
goes
a
to-
bread knife, go right through it, and you'd have exactly the same amount of weight of image, people, flash, information
Right.
on each side. And then, but if we were to run a knife right down the center of the entombment of Parmigianino,
Right.
we have one side that is packed full of body. We have the figure immediately behind Christ, and he's filling 1/4 of the vertical space here. And then we have the top half of the body of Christ, and it's right in front of us, and it's all claustrophobically placed. And then on the right-hand side, you see a whole group of people behind the slab that Christ is being laid on, and just his legs. And one is about being completely full, and the other one is about an emptiness.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about that balance. So, because if we were to show one half and one half of each of them, you can imagine the weight of what would be on the other side of the Montagna, but you have no concept. It's a thoroughgoing surprise at how different it is. And I sometimes I use this. Okay, so when you look at a person's face and you realize how very different the two sides of their face are, right?
Yeah.
And this is exactly that. It's like one is the open side, one is the closed side. And it's like that with these Mannerist images. They're pushing things back. They're pulling things forward. The figures are extended. The faces are worried. The mark is really omnipresent, and it's jittery, and it's nervous, and it's very true to you can see the artist's hand absolutely present in that moment. It is the same kind of thing as when you take an image and you alter it, but when you see the National Enquirer, you're standing at the grocery, okay, back in the days when you would go to the grocery store and you'd stand there in the checkout line, and there's that dreadful thing, that penny misery, the National Enquirer is there. And you go, that is Bill Clinton, but it looks wrong. And what they did was they flipped the photo so it would fit their graphic design.
Right.
And it completely changes the way you perceive it. Just like if we were to take something and show it in reverse, like the negative image of a person, it just changes it. And it's the same way. You can't just take half of a Parmigianino. He really has addressed every part of that picture plane. It's a completely different language than anybody that came before. And he knows how to draw. He's choosing not to draw everything. And can you imagine if these figures in this entombment, where everybody looks so worried about placing the Savior on a slab, as though for butchery, how different the emotional impact of that is from imagine this image, the Parmigianino drawn by Montaigne.
Yeah. It doesn't quite work. I mean, Montaigne is like, I mean, there is expression on these people's faces, and people are kind of like, oh, but
they're going, oh,
right.
No, this is bad.
I think Parmigianino has embraced the messiness of humanity.
Yeah.
In a way.
Well, he's freaking lived through it because he lived through and ran away from the sack of Rome.
There you go.
And now he's got to figure out a new way to present this story. And he gives you a completely different hand, and he gives you new media. And he's the guy that transmits all of this new idea. He's not single-handedly doing this, but it's this new way of depicting space and the figure and the urgency of a situation or the oddness or the awkwardness of it. You know, for the first time, we actually see
the emotion of it.
Yes, and we're seeing awkwardness being depicted. Beautiful awkwardness. Very strange. And that gets transmitted, and it literally does become international mannerism. And so we'll end up seeing up in the northern countries, thank you very much, Hieronymus Koch, for hiring away Giorgio Ghisi to come up and teach our northern boys how to do this very strange thing. And so we'll see in the second half of the 16th century that this Mannerist oddness really persists. So we could let it run. Let's say Raphael dies. He's not the only one that died, but come on. Let's just say it really kicks in about then. Late Renaissance or Mannerist artwork runs until, I would say, certainly the 1580s. By then, the Catholic Church has figured out they've got their thing. They've had their Councils of Trent. They've got their Spanish Inquisition. They've got we're going to be using art as propaganda as a way to bring those souls back to the church. And they will, and Baroque then just becomes the art of superlatives. This is just this marvelous gateway drug to the kind of emotion and trumpets and noise and racket that we'll get in Italian Baroque. But you can see it starting here.
Do you feel like there was even a harkening back to, you know, the end of the world in 1500? Like there's this whole like upset.
What a great question.
In the whole century.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it was.
I mean, the sack of Rome is 1527. Oh, I remembered it.
I'm so proud of you. See? That's just right. But it's true. Okay, so.
All kinds of crap is going on.
When was the global pandemic? Oh, that was 2021. And then the whole century was fucked up until they figured out along about, 2090. 2090.
Yeah.
How to put it together, and then let's see, what would the high post-apocalyptic, the post-pandemic world be? Of course, we'll be long dead, but that's fine. What would the art be like then? And please don't tell me it's going to be in non-fungible tokens.
Yeah, I know. That's a good question about the future of art, because I felt like once you broke apart the representational plane and cubism, that basically you were done, and accepted abstraction as a thing, that you were done.
Right.
What else is there?
Well, now you can accept something that's not even a thing.
Right.
And you can pretend that you own the only digital image of it. So, again, I just have to say...
losing the craft of art.
And that's why looking at somebody who was that questing spirit of what if and why not, and I need to get my name out there. If I started thinking about how well this guy who is dead by half my age, I would think this is the one that would be a perfect candidate to talk to my students at Maryland Institute at the Career Development Career Fair, saying, okay, this is what you need to do. You need to have your finger on the pulse of some of the new technologies that are coming down the pike. There's this thing, it's still kind of new, it's engraving. That's going to attract a certain kind of audience. And then there's this other thing, woodcut. Now, certain people like it, but you know what? I've noticed folks really like the way wash drawings look down here because it's in Italy, and we've got this disegno thing, and we respect drawing because that is the undergirding of a solid painting.
Well, it's the hand of the artist.
Indeed. And so I'm going to hey, look, I got these guys figuring out. Except that, let's think about this. Antonio da Trento, the part I didn't tell you, it's kind of sad. Well, Antonio da Trento, while Parmigianino's asleep one night, he steals all of his plates, his drawings, his wood blocks. It's written, it's Vasari says so in his Lives of the Artists. Fuck.
No.
So you got to still have some dirt. That'd be like, the Italian Inquirer and what's going on in art today. But that concept of being the guy that taps into, okay, engraving an audience, we got a woodcut an audience, and now what's this cool thing, etching? I use acid and I bite it and I can get my drawings out there. Check this out. Boom, 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 boom. His ideas get out there. And honestly, his stuff is still inspiring artists in the 1700s when there's this whole new fluorescence of the love of the sketch and the love of the idea of the drawing on the way to...
Of the hand of the artist.
Yes. And the idea that a drawing is a means to an end. It's not just something, it's not a waypoint. It can be unto itself. It's okay to not be finished. In fact, it's more interesting. So we could just give a lot of etching to this guy, and that was not something I would initially have thought about doing.
I know, it's crazy.
But then when I tried it...
Our minds have been blown tonight, people.
So if I were to go to the next slide and I'd say, okay, now let's compare Albrecht Dürer's etching onto iron.
I'm not sure we got to that in
I mentioned it.
one.
Oh, we did. I
Dürer...
mentioned that he tried it, and it was like he did 6, and he went, "Fuck this noise. This is stupid. Look at it. It looks. There's no subtlety." And then we have this guy, not even 10 years later.
What?
Going, let's try this.
That's 10 years later?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Okay, but there's a difference between etching on iron and etching on copper.
Right.
And it means you have to have the right chemistry.
Exactly.
Why did he go into alchemy? Why was he into the magic of things like that? Because it's science, and science is magic. So then, the last slide I would say is, let's just see what happens in the course of a century. And the last thing I would show him is an etching done by a guy named Barocci about 1580. And you go, wait. That was in the space of 60 years.
60?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Barocci's, These
And
two
then
are quite beautiful.
Oh, man. And you remember how many students would love to do their final project on that?
On St. Francis?
Yeah, St. Francis and Ecstasy. Oh, my goodness. So we'll get to that Italian, up the road. But in the meantime, I didn't expect to give all the glory to this dude named Girolamo Francesco Mazzoli, the little one from Parma. But 37 years, if I could have gotten that much done, hells yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to know more. And so thanks for letting me learn. And I guess I'm going to stop now. Okay.
I know. I have to go do some digging to see if there was a big Parmigianino show somewhere. And if anyone paid attention during that show to his prints, because
exactly.
The painting people probably didn't.
No, but that's just the thing. That's that new thing, the painter printmaker. And he's the first.
Right.
He's that first of the Rembrandts and the Goyas and the Whistlers.
Right.
He's the first.
Crazy.
Isn't that wild?
It is wild.
Yeah. Wait a minute.
My mind is blown.
Somebody got there before RVR?
I've been listening to you for 15, 20...
I'm sorry.
Years, and I never caught that bit about Parmigianino.
I just started really thinking about this guy. Parmigianino was just testing everything. And... he wasn't a scofflaw and outlaw like Caravaggio, who died on a beach in Malta.
After murdering somebody.
Yeah, but he tried everything and savvy. I wonder if he was a nice guy. I guess
that's a good question.
Maybe he's a total jerk, but he certainly knew how to work his crowd. He never suffered for business.
Yeah, he got it.
Right? And am I smart enough to do that? No.
Well, and I kind of appreciate that the church is not in control all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's freeing for many artists.
Freeing, of course, freedom can also be terrifying, but it can't be that different from what this guy was going through. And his town is completely wiped out, almost as bad as those poor folks in Kentucky for a 227-mile tornado.
Right.
You don't know when it's going to drop out of the sky. In fact, that's almost exactly what it must have been like for the way the sack of Rome came down.
But 6 months of it?
Well, that's just it. That's what humanity
living with that kind of tension and stress. And
absolutely, and uncertainty, and will I eat?
Flight and
yes. It's people, and it's people.
I think people forget that.
And the fact that it's like, how do I make a visual interpretation of something that adds honor and strength to a long-standing tradition that keeps us whole? And in this case, it was still the church. Not the church as in the bad church, as in a faith structure. There are people who have a faith structure and they endure because they realize it's more about something bigger than themselves. They give back, they think harder, they pray, they make, they do. I look at the work output of some of the artists that I admire most and think there had to have been something larger than them that made them keep pushing. It's a really special thing to be the person that. I never want to be so presumptuous as to think, I'm an artist. Number one, it's a gift. Number two, don't squander your gifts. Number three, what can I do to give back? And I don't know, I would like to know more about this Parmigianino guy. It's like, okay, well, let's try it this way. Let's try it. And maybe he was shallow as could be. But hell, he's a good painter. And he could read his audience. He figured that stuff out, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable that he doesn't... I mean, he's the Dürer of the South, really.
Yeah, actually.
Anyway, I mean, people sort of hold up Mantegna as...
Well, he is, but he's 50 years earlier. It's a different generation.
Right.
So, I mean, literally,
He's
it's
sort
a
of the
different...
bridge, yeah.
Absolutely. It's a different time. And you know, be the guy that... Be the Steve Jobs of etching. You know, say, how do we put this thing on the... Hey, let's try out a couple of cool compositions, see, and throw them out there and see if people like them. And they're like, this shit travels. This is cool. Okay, hey, wait. And I can let the chemicals do the work and it tells... Oh, this print thing could be, we could use this for good or ill. We could use it for the church. So that's the big fulcrum of this Italian. And there are a couple more, of course, we have to throw in there. But it starts getting interesting and messy because the Alps are a semi-permeable membrane.
There's much more to come.
Thanks, folks.
Yeah, this is going to go on and on because we get to go so much deeper with no time constraint than class.
Yeah, I had no idea we were going to get to do just Parm today.
Yeah, we had plans to do much more.
Yes, half the fun is in the wanting. And that's the other thing, though, when as an artist like this guy, you have to have the want to. It's not something that just happens. You can't just, okay, today I'm an artist and, you know, that brush is going to go dancing across the canvas or... You have to come up with those ideas. You have to do something. It just doesn't, boing, it's not Athena coming out of Zeus.
And a reminder that they didn't have the internet to refer to.
Not a bit. We had the past.
Images were not omnipresent.
History prints rocks, guys. See you next time.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us for Platemark, Series 2, The History of Western Printmaking. As always, I have to thank my co-host, True Ludwig, whose brain is insane. I don't know how he does it. And also a thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. The images that we talk about on all of the episodes are put up onto I put them up onto the show notes on platemarkpodcast.com. So you can go there and find all of the images to help you follow along as you're listening. I hope it's helpful. And otherwise, tell a friend, let them know you're listening to something cool, and hopefully we can get the word out. So I appreciate you, and we will see you next time.